Thank you for tuning in to the CatchLife Fund's Coach's Corner podcast. We hope you enjoy today's episode and will consider supporting the CatchLife Fund and the veterans we serve. Visit our website for more information about our programs at CatchLiftFund.org. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis or suicidal thoughts, please call 988 or the Veterans Crisis Line 988, followed immediately by the number 1. The views and opinions expressed during the Coach's Corner podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the CatchLife Fund. The CatchLife Fund does not verify or warrant the truth or accuracy of statements made during the podcast, and statements therein are not to be construed as an official policy or position of the CatchLife Fund. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and nothing herein should be construed as health, medical, or other professional advice. The Coach's Corner is a place for veterans to connect, heal, and share their stories. I'm Melissa Luke, the host of the Coach's Corner podcast. I am a U.S. Army Iraq War veteran, coach, and program director for the CatchLife Fund. The Coach's Corner is sponsored by ID Technologies. Welcome to this week's episode of the Coach's Corner. Thanks for tuning in today. We are excited to talk with U.S. Army veteran and Cal veteran athlete, Alex Rueda. Alex works as a senior talent acquisition partner, and we're so excited to have him join us today. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's going to be so much fun talking with you today, Alex. Let's jump right into it. Alex, talk to us a little bit about your life growing up and what would lead you to join the military right out of high school.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I was actually born in Caracas, Venezuela. My dad is ex-CIA, so we moved around a lot. As a child, I always had a big dream of being a superhero, right? Even when I was a small kid, my mom would always ask me what I would want to be when I grew up. So I was a superhero. And the only thing I could find that was equivalent to that was either, the military or law enforcement or firefighting. And then as I went through high school, I just knew that I wanted to join the Army and I wanted to join the infantry, just because that's what wins wars. I know it sounds very arrogant, but we always used to talk about how, there's 2 MOSs, right? One, infantry, and then everything that supports the infantry.
Right.
But as you look through military history and everything else, you need boots on ground. So essentially, I signed up in 2000 I signed up in the MEPS or the MEPS program or whatnot, delayed entry program, excuse me. And then my junior year, and then pretty much my senior year after I graduated, a week later, I was in basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia.
So that was a quick turnaround for you.
Yeah, it was. But I also knew that, talking with my mom, that I needed discipline. And it was kind of an interesting conversation because my dad was like, no, you're going to go to college. I told my mom I'm going to flunk out of college, because my freshman and sophomore year of high school, I was a good kid. Junior, senior year, not so much. I hung out with the wrong kids, egging houses. I got brought home by the cops one time as well. So I knew that if I joined college, I'd probably just fail out of it. So I needed something with discipline, and I knew the Army would give me that. So.
What was it like, so you definitely had expectations on the front end, especially, growing up and just like that superhero mentality. What was it like getting to Fort Benning, going through boot camp, going through basic, becoming an infantryman? What was that like for you?
That's a great question. I laugh about it just because you're never prepared. I think that's kind of the number one thing. You're never prepared.
Yeah, you can't be.
Yeah. It's like no matter how much you prepare, you get in there, it was late when we got into Fort Benning, Georgia, you're on the bus stops, and then you get to 30th AG, which is just the worst place to be. You don't even know about that part of it just because of the wait anyways. And they come on the bus and they start screaming at you and you're like, what in the world? It's, it's a night and day
shocking,
right? Yeah. Especially after coming out of high school. Don't get me wrong. I've had coaches yell at me, but they're just in your face yelling, get off the bus. Everything's just mass pandemonium, throwing stuff off. I remember we get into these loose formations, come sit down. We had to shave, they shaved our heads. So it was just, it was crazy. But you pick up on it pretty quickly as well. And then, you're excited to be there once the nerves kind of settle and everybody gets settled in and you get all your equipment and such. But then you don't realize nobody tells you about like 30th AG, and I always say that's where like dreams die. So 30th AG, of course, for I guess non-veteran listeners, is where it's the receiving battalion, right? So you get there, you get all your equipment and everything else, and then you wait. And I think that's probably the worst. Is you just wait and wait and wait. And I remember we were supposed to go, and then we got delayed. I ended up spending, I think, like almost a month and a half in 30th AG.
Oh, wow.
Because they're like, you're to go, and they're like, never mind, we delayed them because X, Y, and Z. And it was because in the midst of it, they were transitioning, our OSET training, and they're extending it. So we're just like, oh man, this really sucks. But yeah, so that was fun. And then of course, then once you actually get into basic training, and we did OSET training, so our AIT and basic were literally combined, which is probably the worst. So if you mess up on day one, you still have the same drill instructors at the end of it all. Yeah. So
they
it was always
funny. Quite well.
Yes, they do. And the funny thing is they remembered me, but not in a bad way. Luckily, at first they didn't know who I was. I was kind of the quiet kid of the unit, and I did as I told. And but that was another whole just interesting expectation, right? Because you get up on the cattle trucks, they drive you actually to your unit, and then it's more yelling and screaming. And I remember with all the duffel bags, find your duffel bag. And that was, in the big pile, which is always funny. And I always laugh now because when you're at the airport, it's like, this is why I can find my bag so quickly.
For sure, you can spot that puppy, yep.
Yeah, exactly. And then, making you do PT with it, making us chug water. I remember that. They're like, oh, you need to chug water. People puking water everywhere. People screaming at you, So it was interesting. It's a shell shock coming from the civilian life into this. But you learn pretty quickly, right? So.
What year was that, Alex?
That was in 2003. So
2003.
June 2003. June 16th, 2003.
So you would go on and you would deploy fairly quickly to Iraq.
Yeah. Yep.
What was that time? What was that time like, kind of in between there, right? So once you graduated AIT and then leading up to Iraq.
Yeah, great question. So I graduated AIT and I was still stuck at Fort Benning, Georgia, because they were like, you're going to be a javelin gunner. So then I went through javelin school right after that. So then I got out of Fort Benning in October. And then I got orders for Fort Irwin, which is not the greatest spot for a first duty station because you do OP4, you do Blue 4. It's a lot different, but I lucked out because when I got to the unit, they're in this like transitional period, right? Because they were talking about, well, you are an infantry unit, you are combat effective, so you guys are gonna have to deploy at some time, right? So then once that started coming down the pipeline, they changed it because before it was kind of more laid back. It was more like, oh, we're doing the OP4 training. And then it shifted from we do OP4 training and then we'd have our Blue Force training, right? So we were always literally in the field, right? We'd either do, movements to be OP4 and play the bad guys, and then we'd come back and then we'd probably have a couple months and then we would have to go do our Blue Force training, right? So going to the range, getting qualified, doing our CQB stuff, getting ready for that. And I think it was a year and a half once I was out of the service, or not service, excuse me, but out of basic training.
Yep.
We came down on orders. They're like, yep, you guys are going to Iraq. The interesting part is we got a lot of guys from, the initial invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq because, the war had been going on and raging. And they came to us to avoid deployment. So we had a lot of guys from 3rd ID, 82nd Airborne, 101st, really great guys that I served with. And now they were presented with, they literally just came back from deployment. I remember Sergeant Carroll, he was an awesome guy with 101st, literally just got back. I think he was maybe back for 6 months. And they're like, we're deploying. You have the choice, right? Because at the time they were rolling out the choice, right? Because they want to give you a year back with the unit. And then a couple guys from 3rd ID as well. Sergeant Weinberg from the 82nd too. He came back and I think he'd just been back maybe like 10-ish months or so, maybe a year. So they're given a lot of these options. And it was really cool to see those guys just say, yep, we're definitely going to go with y'all, which I was very fortunate because, it's great to have those combat veterans, with us to kind of get us through that deployment. But yeah, it was interesting because the entire time as being in infantry, you train up, right? So you train up to essentially go to war. I know it's like this interesting concept and it's like the Super Bowl, right? And I remember my colonel would always say, combat is the bloodiest team sport ever. And, you're told this. And I was like, yeah, like we're going. And I was like excited about it. I know it's crazy to say. I'm not like a, warmongering individual, but it's like,
I think a lot of us definitely were like that. I mean, we were, I was like that, I was very, very excited to go. Like, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the fight. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Versus, sitting there back in the
Yeah.
reserve, and I've had buddies just, from basic training from 25th to 101st telling me they're deploying. We're still chatting. And I'm sitting here in Fort Irwin out of all the duty stations. So finally, we get our orders to go, and we went from '05 to '06 as well. But yeah, we were very, very excited. It was funny because it was on my Facebook, where it was 2005 and I was in the C-130 just smiling with my thumb up. I look just like a baby in there because I think I was 20
Yeah.
years old, 20 years old,
Oh
right?
my
20,
gosh.
because I turned
Yeah.
21 in
Yep.
Iraq. The worst time to turn 21 because, in the Army, you
For
can't,
sure.
that. You know all this, right? So we were excited. The train up was fun. The interesting part that got me was people actually wanted to get out of deployment. And I found this like hard to like grasp, right? Because I was like, we literally spent our entire careers, we signed up for Army Infantry, right? So it's like, I know I'm getting in the fight. I know I'm going to have to fight. I know we're going to go to combat. This is our job. So why'd you sign up for that? Like, I'd always have those conversations with them. Like, why did you sign up for this MOS? Oh, well, college. And I was like, okay, come on now. Like, you could have been, I don't know, like finance. No offense to my finance, because we actually had a NCO who shifted from finance into the infantry. It's really cool to see as well. And really great, squared away NCO. But yeah, so I was like, there's jobs you can do where you might not necessarily be in the fight, right? It's like, where you're not going to be exposed.
Right. So. Talk about what it was like going to Iraq, especially with that senior leadership. What did that do kind of for the morale for your unit?
No, yeah, that's a great question. I think we had a high morale because a lot of us younger, lower enlisted, because now that I think back to it, like my squad leader, Sergeant Carroll, 101st, he deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now he's going back to Iraq, right? So he'd been, and he was there for initial, invasion of Afghanistan. So there was just a lot. So he had a lot of combat experience. Sergeant Weinberg had a lot of combat experience with the 82nd. We even Sergeant Rivera, he, unfortunately he's not with us anymore, but, he's from Puerto Rico. He's another 82nd guy that came with us as well. But yeah, so we had all this combat experience, which was cool. So like when we trained up for it, they were able to say, hey, this is how we're doing it. This is what we're currently doing, and really guide us through that. And it was funny because we'd always run through drills. So our morale was high. And I remember when we got into country, we inherited a sector from a National Guard unit, right? So this has been my first exposure. And as you know, we call them nasty girls and everything else. I got a lot of love for National Guard, some National Guard units as well. But it was a bunch of Arkansas guys, right? And I'm just like, oh man, this is going to be interesting. Funny thing enough is they were like literally all corporals. Don't know how they pulled that off, but the entire company of corporals. But they were really squared away. They were like, that was our like first exposure. We did like a right seat ride with them. And I was like, man, they're like really squared away. Really surprised by that. But yeah, and it was interesting because when we got there, we ended up spending, like about a month, I think, in Kuwait, because they're like, all right, we don't know if you're going to take Brads because we're an APC unit and we were trained up on them, or if you're going to get those death traps of those upper armor Humvees. And I call them a death trap because, they can't withstand a lot of beating compared to like a Bradley or, even an Abrams, right? And at the time, they were using, V-bids, they were using, the big IEDs, they're starting to utilize shape charges as well. They're getting more complex with how they would, run their attacks. The 155 millimeter howitzer shells, where I'm like, well, nobody's going to survive that, right? Big ball bearings too that they would put in these things. So we're like, oh man, let's hope we don't get Humvees. So they send us out early. Then they're like, yeah, you guys are going to get the Humvees in country. And I was like, oh man, so we're not going to get it. But then we ended up offloading a bunch of Brads and 113s for them. But yeah, then when we went over, like I said, we got flown over. Of course, you do the C-130 thing, which it was funny because nobody prepared us for like. But I always thought it was funny because I think they wanted to see how we'd react to combat veterans, of course, that have done it. A C-130 landing where they do the 3 loops and then they just dive bomb so they don't get, blown up or whatnot. So that was kind of fun little ride. But yeah, once we got in the sector, it was interesting just taking over the Humvees and learning the sector as much as possible. And then, we were learning our own SOPs. Of course, they were kind of evolving. We were there during that time when they like literally wanted to test out everything. We went from that Donald Rumsfeld where it's like you had the hillbilly armor, to now we're being active with like the warp block systems and things like that. And we were there test dummies. So that was interesting because we'd have to test out a lot of different things. And a lot of it didn't work. So we'd always kind of laugh about it and tell them like, this is not like the smartest thing ever. But yeah, so it's kind of our roundabout experience. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
No, you're all right. What was it like being there in 2005? Talk about that time period.
Yeah, no. So it was interesting, just because I know they were kind of shifting from that tail end of a war where we're essentially fighting an insurgency, right? So then the
Right.
tactics drastically changed. We saw this big, shift in using, the V bids. They weren't necessarily utilizing like complex ambushes, so they would essentially, blow up a charge. You would stop, and they want you to stop within that 155 millimeter, right?
Yep, exactly.
Or they would have one of those exposed, and you'd stop, be like, all right, and then so we were doing that. They were utilizing ball bearings. I remember they were utilizing shape charges as well, to really hit us hard with that. And then of course we had some like minor engagements with people shooting from crowds. I thought it was interesting because our unit was squared away. No offense to any of our other units. We were a third platoon, and I remember one time we passed the crowd. We literally passed the crowd. Everybody's just waving at us as we're passing them. We're like, okay, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Just, dead eerie. We get past the crowd, and then another one of our other companies that was operating, I won't name names, but was operating sector, takes fire from the crowd. Literally after we were just there like 5 to 10 minutes earlier, right? So then we turned around and came around, and then the crowd just dispersed. We ended up earning the name for ourselves just because we were come in aggressive, get the sectors down. We did inherit some black sectors and things like that. And of course, the black sectors are the more hostile sectors towards the U.S. forces. And I remember one time, I think the height of it, we took over Abu Ghraib after the whole, issue with,
after the scandal and everything.
Yeah, after the scandal. So we inherited, there's a bunch of infantry guys. They're like, you're going to operate out of Abu Ghraib, and Abu Ghraib will be kind of like your resting post. We'll have towers once a week. For you all to take a break. And I was like, this is great, because of course, one, the Iraqi, or the insurgencies won't shoot at the towers because they're like, we're not going to engage these towers. They have 50 cals, Mark 19s and such. But that was interesting too, because I remember one time we shared a sector with a Marine unit, and then they ended up like handing them over, and our platoon sergeant came by and was like, yeah, hey, they picked up a guy in their sector. And literally the guy was operating out. He lived where we lived, but he would not operate in our sector. So he went to the Marine sector because he knew he could get away. And they questioned him about it. And he's like, yeah, that will kill us. That the Black Horse will kill us. So I was like, all right. So we earned a name.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool to that we were, squared away, right? That we were doing what we were supposed to do. Not. So that was, I think, kind of the highlight of our career, or my career at least, doing that, just kind of doing the right thing. But a lot of times, most of the stuff we would deal with is, game blown up now and again. Luckily, we lost one during that time, but a lot of times, we did luck out. I don't want to say luck, but maybe it was just, faith, that, because there was a couple of times, like I know my buddy Dust, one time, they got blown up, and luckily they buried it really, really deep, and it ended up messing up the Humvee. And my buddy Murphy was in there, and I was just spraying oil everywhere as well. And luckily Dust was sitting down, because if he was standing up, he would probably been chewed up by it. But that happened, and it's always interesting because we were always just like, we knew. It's hard because like you're driving through and there's like nobody around, and normally like your spidey senses would go off, and at first we're kind of like, but and they'd always tell you, like, if people are gone, something's going to go down.
Right.
And as soon as we went down the road, it just, went off, and we're just like, the vehicle, I had to pull the vehicle out and everything else. Of course, everybody was fine afterwards. Just they're not very up and up on like how to bury these things because they don't want to get caught. But yeah, so it was, like I said, it was an interesting time. They changed the ROE while we were in sector. So like the biggest round we could technically fire was a 5.56. If you wanted to fire like a 7.62 or anything bigger, like you'd have to like call it up. And then of course they loosened the 7.62 a little bit. We had to do the warning shot type of stuff, and then we could engage set targets as well. So we were also doing like policing actions. We were doing presence patrols. We were doing raids. We did a few raids. We got to work with the British SAS, which was fun. Provide like inner cordon. We got to work with the 10 Special Forces group, which, shout out to them. They are an awesome group of professionals. So we got to help with just some cordons for them, just because they run with, a couple gun trucks. So when we run with 6, we can definitely help them out. And there was a couple of times where we had to, I don't want to say bail them out. We were just picking them up essentially as they were doing their crazy operations. Because I remember one time they were, it was kind of a cool story. They literally dressed up to do like this arms deal, and it was literally 2 guys in a bongo truck, and they're like, we're gonna be in this area, so you guys should just be cycling around just in case. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like they're just like off the grid two guys, and they
That's
ended up getting
incredible.
this crazy shootout and everything else. And we're just like, what in the world is the thing going off? So we were able to just, come up and pick them up or provide support. Nothing, like I said, nothing too crazy, but it's just funny how like all these little events were happening. So
It's incredible. Looking back at it now, Alex, what do you remember most about that time in Iraq?
Oh, that's a good question. Honestly, I remember like just some of the sucky missions that we would run. At time. I remember one time we were laughing because it reminded me of the movie Black Hawk Down, where they're like, oh, let's just take ammo. We don't need water. We'll be in and out. So we had a similar raid. We were there when one of the like media helicopters got shot down, and we were in the Abu Ghraib, and it was one of the sectors off on the outside. So we were like, all right, cool. They're like, we're gonna go raid it, and it'll be a quick raid. We'll go raid and then come back. So we had the same mentality, right? Ammo, a little bit of water, not as much food. We ended up, our platoon at least, we ended up staying out there 3 or 4 days, I think is what we ended up running. And yeah, we were like, well, that was dumb, of course, because they didn't want us to come back. They wanted us to continue to run through the sector. Interesting enough, which was crazy, because they're like, I don't know how people are running through this. Well, there's an engineer unit that was, I should say loosely, watching the sector. Well, as we're raiding and pulling things out like RPGs and different things in these homes, I'm like, how much presence patrols have they been doing, right? So they ended up getting their butts chewed for that, because they weren't taking it seriously, right? They were watching from afar, and the enemy was able to kind of do what they wanted to. So then we had to like help police this up and help them out, which was always interesting as well. But yeah, so I always remember that piece of it. And I remember one time we were super dirty, just because they didn't let us go in. We've just been running operations, so we literally found like this onion farm, and then we're like, all right, we've got baby wipes, so we're gonna wipe ourselves down as well. And then we ended up, I forget who it was, I think it was Murphy. He ended up grabbing an onion and throwing it at the back of the head of Sergeant Bassell, one of our squad leaders, and then he jumped in the vehicle. That just started this big onion fight, so we were throwing onions at each other. We smelled like onions afterwards. Then we were like,
oh my gosh, I bet.
It was one of those moments where we were just having fun chucking onions at each other, as well. But yeah, I remember those times where, or where it was just other times where, it was just kind of running raids and everything else. I remember one time, because I was smaller back then, and I was the saw gunner for a while, and I don't know why. I think they just thought it was funny to send me in to do things. But I remember one time we were doing a raid, and there was this wall, and of course I'm probably one of the lighter ones that they could lift up and over. It's like, all right, we're gonna get you over this wall. So they like start elevating me over this wall, not realizing that there's like this big dip on the other side. So the wall looks short, and I end up rolling off and like falling this big dip. So it's just kind of funny, just moments like that. Or one time, what was it? Sergeant Dingle had me like walk on this like cruddy rickety bridge, and of course I like weighed the heaviest. He did it on purpose because he wanted to see me fell through the thing as well. So just fun little things like that is what I remember, and just the camaraderie that we did have during that time, and just it sucks so bad we kind of laugh about it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Alex, talk about coming back from Iraq back to the U.S. and what that was like for you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we were not prepared. I think even the U.S. Army, I think, failed us, because we came back during that time. I talked to psychologists. It's easy to talk to a psychologist. You're reminding yourself, like, don't say anything crazy, and you'll be fine, right? And you get back, and I think most veterans go through this where they're like, I'm going to be fine, right? I'm not going to get PTSD. I'm not going to be these crazy people, right? It's not me. And you don't realize it, like I didn't realize like, the anger side of stuff, and I'd raise my anger now and again, because you're in, right? And you're dealing with it, as well. So when I came back, the transition was interesting. We had to remind ourselves, not to drive down the middle of the road,
right?
Not to be speeding, and then you get into this mindset of, oh, I'm indestructible, right? I was one that survived. Like,
for sure.
We all have friends that we've lost, and we lost, one in the unit. So then we're just like, yeah, you're invincible. So they tell you all these things, right? They tell you all these things. You talk to a psychologist, just to make sure. That was kind of like the bare minimum, right? And we're just enjoying life, being back, just being able to relax. The funny thing, though, is we always laughed about it because we literally left the desert, and we drive all the way to Fort Irwin back into a desert, right? So it's like it felt like we never left. But so it was fun coming back. I think the like transitional piece with it, and not to be like mean, but yeah, I think they did fail us because they never like prepared you like what PTSD is, what are the symptoms, right? And how we can police each other up, because I know, I've had even buddies that have deployed even afterwards, and they were dealing with PTSD issues from their previous deployment, and
Right.
and I've lost good buddies from suicide, right? I even found out from one of my soldiers, which I think is a testament to leadership. But he was like, yeah, he's like one of the guys we started with, Cooper. He was a Marine, and he deployed before, and I think he was with Afghanistan. And I found out he ended up killing himself during his Afghanistan deployment. And like the sad part, because you hear about it, he put his IBA over his head so he wouldn't end up hurting somebody. And I think that's the thing. They don't prepare you for that, because there are warning signs leading up to it, and it's like not even if it isn't affecting you as bad. I think it's also good to get that for everybody else, right? So you can see and have those conversations, because I think a lot of time in the military they do a good job, especially in the infantry, breaking you down, right? Because we have to take somebody's life, and I always remembered as you're a weapon, I'm a weapon, I'm just a better trained weapon, right? I'm going to survive this. But they don't tell you how to turn that off, right? They don't tell you how to be a civilian. They don't tell you all those pieces. And I don't know if I want to, or retransitioning into civilian life or not, but definitely that I think was the hardest piece of it, because while you're dealing with PTSD, because I've been diagnosed with it as well. I told myself I was going to have PTSD, and then when I got out, I think that is literally the hardest transition ever, right? Because and I had the worst get out, right? This is how you write a resume, and this is how you search for a job.
Yep.
Two things I was given, right? Resume and a job. So that's why I ended up becoming a corrections officer, right? So
okay. But how did kind of looking back now at it too, Alex? How did you, or either how did you, or how do you see it now, kind of manifesting those early signs of PTSD and kind of the effects that would have on your life?
No, yeah, great question. So when I got out in 2007. Like I said, it was interesting transition as well, just because it doesn't hit you at first, right? You get out, you're excited. I'm a civilian now.
Yeah.
This is going to be great. I'm back on the block. But then a couple things happen, right? One, you're not around everybody, because that was one thing. I was a single soldier, so I was around my guys a lot. On the weekends, you could find people. We'd hang out on Fridays, drink beer, barbecue, play video games. I know, very boring, but we enjoyed it, right? We enjoyed linking Xboxes and such. And now you go from that to you're on your own. You go from a bigger purpose to not having a purpose. I think that was probably the hardest thing, right? The infantry, for myself, and being able to have that drive and purpose, it was this is the ultimate goal. Of course, everybody thought I'd be a lifer. Even my first sergeant Morales thought I was going to sign at the last day. But instead, I didn't. And when I got out, it was just man, this sucks. I remember in the first 6 months, I was I kind of want to go back. I want to go back into the infantry, pursue my career, because you knew where you stood. You're around a bunch of guys, that were committed as well, kind of towards that purpose. And I think the other concept was there's guys I didn't get along with, but they would take around for me. I'd take around for them. And that's a hard concept for civilians to get. They're whoa, wait a minute. I was yes, I would eat around for anybody in my platoon, whether I may have agreed with their lifestyle or not.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or not lifestyle, but essentially what they would do with their time. But it's just I still love them as a brother. And they would do the same for me. There was zero doubt, right? And it's really cool to be a part of something like that, right? And then you don't have that. It's pulled out from underneath you. And then you start to experience the PTSD things you never notice, because you get a fix. You do get a fix with the adrenaline and everything else, with being able to run through these missions and deployments. And it was funny because it took me years to figure these things out, right? That becomes normal for us, right? That this is a normal thing. So they remove that normality, and then now you're a civilian. And I went to college. I was not your traditional college student. And man, college students, I'm sorry, they're annoying me. They're you got free college. It's you can go to combat.
Oh my gosh, right? Yeah.
College, you know what I mean? I was I've got tons of friends that have done that, right? I even had one guy. It was funny because I joined the Guard right after. I got a lot of respect for the Guard, which was because I was going to get out. And then my unit in Maryland essentially was hey, we want you to come with us. It was a SIOP unit that I was supposed to do for after, because I only did a 4-year stint, so another 4 years. But I was supposed to go with them to Afghanistan. I was yeah, I'll do that, but just give me a couple months to move out to Minnesota, and then I'll essentially meet you guys. And they're oh no, you literally got a handful. I think they were 2 weeks, or find a home. So I ended up joining the Guard. So I still had some of that connection. But of course, my Guard unit, they were deployed and they were coming back, because interesting enough, they were placed. They ended up having the same exact sector we did, but in 2007, which was kind of cool.
Oh, wow.
So
That's
when they came
incredible.
over, we BS about it too. Really squared away unit too. Shout out to, of course, the Minnesota Guard. I know I never would have said like nasty girls were squared away, but they are. They are. They deploy a lot. They are very professional, which was cool to be a part of. So I still had that piece of it, but it was only 1 week in a month, 2 weekends a year with it, and then you're just kind of like, all right. And then you start to deal with like the anger issues. I think that was the biggest thing for me, like angry outbursts, where I'd wake up and I'm like, this is a bad day. Like I want to literally hurt somebody, and I have no idea why, right? Like why am I so angry? Why am I so aggressive? Night sweats, things like that. Yeah, and then even the VA, they do a horrible job with mental health. They still do now. I went to the VA like I need help at one point. Like I need help. I have trouble with controlling anger. These angry outbursts. Like I don't want to hurt anybody. Like, but I want skill sets that I can utilize, not medication. Like skill sets.
Yeah.
And all they want to do is medicate me, right? What medication do you want? This one has the least amount of facts. So I did the medication thing to test it out. And it was like a mood stabilizer, and it like changed me. And nobody wanted to be around me because you're just like, that's exciting, that's great, right? You're not your normal passionate person. So they're just kind of failing on that piece of it. I even attempted their therapy, and they were like, oh, it's one event that's being traumatic. And I'm like, well, which one? Like we've been blown up, we've been shot at, like we've seen things. We've seen dogs eat dead bodies, like we've seen dead bodies. What I mean? Like none of this is normal, and So then you're looking for help, right? You're looking for that help, and sometimes you don't get it from the VA and everything else. I lucked out though, within my journey, and started just to kind of reach out to locally here in Minnesota. Some of the psychologists outside of the VA, because I was like, well, I need help, and really working with them, and then of course having this like conversation. I think that's probably the hardest part. A lot of veterans, they go, nobody understands me. If you talk about that means it didn't really happen. It's like no. Like you need to talk about these events.
For sure.
With somebody, and even your loved ones too. Like, I talk to my wife about it all the time. She may not grasp the concept, but it feels good, right? You feel heard as well. And even she can even tell you to this day, I'll wake up and I'll be like, babe, it's a bad day, right? It's a bad day.
Yeah.
So normally when I have a bad day, I literally, because I go to the gym, and that's my thing, right? I know Tim Kennedy had said it before, find something to pour your heart into, right? Really work towards that. So that's been like my focus has been, competing for the Masters CrossFit. The tactical games will be my next, escapade, which will be fun. But that's how I deal with, those PTSD pieces of it as well.
Alex, what would you say to any veterans who are really struggling with PTSD right now, and they don't even know where to start, or really if there is hope?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. I always say one, if I could do it, anybody could do it. Just because I'm stubborn. I am half Cuban. I remember I was visiting my dad, and he reminded me, Cubans can be very, very stubborn in their ways, right? We can be very stubborn. We can be like, no, we don't need help. So if I can find help, anybody can. I think it starts, locally, of course, talking to your loved ones. I'm a part of a lot of Facebook groups, a lot of veteran Facebook groups. They do these periodic check-ins as well. I think if you are struggling, it's definitely, reach out to the Veterans Crisis Line. It's just good to get a hold of somebody, look at your local. I always suggest looking at the local psychologist and make an appointment, right? Get in. It's not crazy. It's more normal to sit down and have those conversations, right? And meet with psychologists, and it's helpful because there's people out there that want to help, right? And I think a lot of times in the veteran community, it's like they don't understand, they don't know. They hang around, the VFW, drink beer. There's times where I used to go hang out there just to listen to the old guys, right? Because they didn't have that support that they need, and that's kind of their time to unwind. But I think that's always a good starting point, right? Is look at the resources, look at what's around you, tell somebody, call friends. Like even if you're not dealing with PTSD, or maybe you have at some point, like check in with your buddies. I'm probably the worst about it, but I still talk to my buddy Murphy now and again. He's a sergeant major in there, but it's that's the other piece of it, right? Reach out, because there's times where I thought about where I want to reach out, and then you look, and they're another, statistic. I think that's kind of, and that becomes sad, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Alex, talk to us about how faith has played a role in your life, and how it continues to play a role in your life in recovery.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think, I know when I deployed, I don't know how people don't come to more faith, because you just see things, right? You see things where people that should have died, and you hear the stories, and they don't, right? Like I think it was Sergeant Carroll was telling me this. They were working with the Iraqi army. Of course, they had him tasked out with them, and they had an airburst mortar kind of go off right above them, and two of our guys were like in the middle of this airburst mortar. They should have been dead, and they're literally untouched, and everybody was kind of dead around them, right? The Iraqi army, sorry for them. But it's like, those moments of like, okay, well, there's got to be something, because if we all have, like I said, an expiration date. That's a prime example of like they should have, without a doubt, been dead, and they weren't, because they're dead center. So you hear stories like that, or like for example, we get blown up. The only reason they're not dead is because it was buried too deep, right? And essentially that's why it ended up happening. So after doing the deployment and everything else, you just kind of, at least for me, I was like, man, there is a God. Like that confirmed that piece of it, just because I'm like watching these things unfold. So then essentially it was actually my wife that got me back into like going to the church. I have a Roman Catholic background. She said, hey, let's go to the movie theater. They have donuts and coffee, which is always interesting. So that pulled me in. I like coffee. I drink a lot of coffee, and I enjoy donuts as well. But I ended up, just going there, and then it made sense to me. And then, now I'm a pastor. I have a pastor.
That's tremendous.
And,
good for you.
So it's been good for me, because I think that's the other thing. Because a lot of times people are like, oh, why is this happening to me? Why is this? And I always love those debates. And I don't mind having a theology debate when it's like, well, why is this happening to me? Shouldn't God make everything better? And everything happens for a reason, right? I look back at my life, and everything has been refining me for these moments as well. And then of course, like when stress comes, it's like, well, this is how it's supposed to happen, right? Eventually it's going to lead me to where I need to go, and then eventually it will work out. So I feel a lot less stress than I think most people would. So
that's tremendous. Thank you for talking about that. I want to switch gears just a little bit here, Alex, because you've already mentioned it, but fitness is a huge part of your life. Talk to us about fitness, Alex.
Yeah, so I've been working out since I was 14. You start off with like the bodybuilder things, get the big biceps, get the ladies, I think, back in the high school era, which is always, I don't like to admit it, but so that was the other piece of it, right? I got out, and I think that was the other side of it. I was missing something. I was missing, the adrenaline dump, because I've talked to my wife about this. She's normally my sounding board. She's great that way. But I got in that conversation about, just kind of the purpose piece of it. And then we talked about the adrenaline side of stuff, just getting those spikes that we were used to, right? And you research a little bit more, and you're like, okay, this is why, right? So I was looking at that. When I got out, I attempted my hand at MMA and Muay Thai. Did that for a little bit as well. Wasn't as successful. It was hard for me to flip my switch. And then of course, on top of that, I couldn't get into the gym as much. And the type of personality I have is like, I want to pour my entire life into that. And the hard part with fighting in general, I still have buddies that fight, is you can't, especially with MMA, you can't make like a ton of money, right? It's and that's the sad part about it. I think they should be more supported and everything else, so you can get the most talented people there. But when you have a family and everything else, it's like, okay, I gotta like be realistic. So then I ended up shifting into CrossFit, because Sergeant Tolberg got me into CrossFit. He actually came out of SFAS, and he was like, hey, this is what group is doing. So he taught me CrossFit back in 2007. So I was like, well, let me get back into it. So I started to really do that. And then I did some competitions here and there. I never really got serious with it. Then at one point, as I started to age, because I'll be 39 next month, I was like, I really want to give this Masters thing a go, right? I think it's a fun thing, because I need a competition. And I need to push myself towards that goal, right? So that's how I operate. I enjoy competing. I enjoy the high pressured situations, kind of very similar to the military, right?
Where exactly.
Take those shots, or move under fire. So I enjoy that. So then that's why I've pushed towards that. Of course, now I have a coach. I'm really zeroing in on just being more competitive at the master side of stuff. And then, funny enough, there's a couple people at our gym. Christy, she actually came in 5th on the elite for the tactical games. And she kind of leads that charge. So I definitely want to transition into that. It's just the investment in gear is kind of the hard part with it. But I like it because it's, so it's like combining CrossFit with shooting, so it's very similar to a stress shoot, right?
That's a great description.
Yeah,
CrossFit
yeah,
shooting.
yes, that's essentially quasi. You know what I mean? Because I realize that there are some interesting movements with it, but that's what it essentially reminds me of, right?
Interesting.
Cleans. We have chucking stuff and then engaging targets, which is always fun, right? You can engage with your AR-15. I know I always say M4, but it's not an M4. AR-15, right? We engage our targets with that and transition to pistol. So it looks, just like a great overall event, especially for veterans. I know there's a veteran community out there. I'm looking at doing the Masters. I know she was a Masters and won it, and then this year she's like, I'm going to do Elite to see where I stack up. Which gives me hope too, because it would be kind of fun to do the Elite division with it. But that's kind of my next goal, is really to pursue that. But like I said, I like that feeling of competing. And I know not everybody's like, oh, I need to compete. But for myself and that mindset, it allows me to get locked in, wake up at 4 a.m. to get to the gym to work out for about 2 hours, and then give it my all, right?
Heck yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Man, I'm so looking forward to continuing to watch your journey and all the great stuff you do.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Alex, talk for a minute to any veterans listening who are looking to be more active. What would you recommend for them?
That's a great question. So I do also have a background in strength conditioning coaching as well. I thought that's what I was going to do to make buku bucks. No, not really make buku bucks. I enjoy it. I enjoy the fitness side of it. But I tell everybody it's consistency, right? Consistency wins out. A lot of times people are like, oh, I'm going to go hard for a day, and then you're just hacked, right? So it's like literally small steps, small goals, right? I realize not everybody's going to do what I do, where 6 days out of the week, 1.5 to 2 hour sessions. If I could do longer, yes, I would. It would drive my wife crazy. She always hates that piece of it, that I could spend probably about 3 hours in the gym, for that. But, it's small steps, right? So if you are stuck on the couch, it's like, hey, I'm going to walk 2 to 3, times a week, right? Walking is helpful. If it's wanting to drop the weight, it's the nutritional piece, but doing it healthy. Because a lot of times people are like, I'm going to undereat, and then we get the negative effect of it, right? It's essentially, we need to meet our calorie goals and everything else. Of course, I don't want to go super in depth into it, because I don't want the listener to be like, oh, Alex told me to do X, Y, and Z. So that's where the nutritional side of stuff comes in. Because a lot of times people are like, I want abs. Well, it starts in the kitchen, right? That's literally where you get your abs, and then to fuel your body, and you can't outwork a bad workout. But I always say the 80-20 rule too when it comes to eating, especially if you are looking just to, not for a competitive side of things. So 80% of the time I eat clean. I don't like to say there's no bad foods. It's just, normally foods that come from better sources, so like vegetables. And then more complete meals, I think, is kind of a key thing, right? Do I have a protein source? Do I have vegetables on there? I know that's probably my number one, which is hard. And then another carbohydrate, right? But you have to find out what works for you. Because I know most people will be like, I eat white rice because I have Crohn's and it's easier for me to digest. Brown rice can upset my stomach, so that's why I kind of avoid it. So it's knowing what works best for you, and then finding something you enjoy. I think is kind of the key thing with that too. A lot of times people are like, I need to go to the gym. It's like, no, I've seen people do it with just eating, walking. I've seen it with people. It's the summer, so go do pickleball, do some fun stuff, right? You gotta figure out, what you want to do. For me, like I said, it's CrossFit, and it's doing the tactical stuff. That's what I enjoy. But yeah, so it's just those small steps and doing them consistently, I think, is kind of
consistency. Yep.
Yes, and not doing a big goal, because I think a lot of times people do that. And I think if veterans that are listening that are in the gym and January rolls around, don't be a dingus. I think that's the number one thing that gets me, is when you see somebody come in the gym, do not be a dingus, right? Because they're on their journey, they're attempting to do that, right? I like to take a positive attitude with it, but I've seen it too, where people are like, oh, this person doesn't know what they're doing. We'll walk over and be like, hey, do you need some help, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the flip side of it, right? In today's culture, we're like, oh, we're going to stand back and not help and not interact. And of course, I came from the East Coast. I came from Maryland, and I know the Midwest is a lot different. Even when I was out visiting, because I can chat with people. Every one time I had a conversation with somebody, and my mom was visiting, and she's like, "Do you know that person?" I have no idea. Just literally right now. Well, why are you talking with her? And I was like, "This is because it's the Midwest, right?"
Yeah.
No, you can definitely do that. Definitely do that with supporting people. I think is kind of the key thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, how did you find CatchLife?
Oh, that's a great question. You've got a lot of great questions today. So I was actually part of another program forget what it was called now. Oh, R4V, right? And they were kind of similar where they would provide, funding for, for memberships and to buy equipment. And I know you asked about CatchLife piece of it, but at the time it didn't pop up. I don't know where they were at in the stages and such. They eventually went under, right? Which was kind of sad to see. It helped support that piece of it. So then I was left without any funding. So I was like, okay, well that's kind of interesting. So then I ended up just kind of doing my own thing for a while. And then I decided to research it one day. I think it was right before the pandemic, or maybe it was during the pandemic. To just kind of really look around, because I was like, well, one, I want to get back to the gym. And two, of course, I was the one working. My wife is a stay-at-home mom, so it's hard to like find funding for the types of gyms around here as well.
Yep.
And don't get me wrong, so it was interesting. So I ended up finding Omni. And then I did a little research, right? I typed in Google, and this time CatchLife came up. It was a really cool, unique story about it, and the title and everything else was kind of drew me in. So then essentially I was like, well, it's worth a shot, right? I'll apply for it, see where it gets me. And now we are, I think, in year 3. So it's just a simple Google search. And I know I've helped with.
That's how I found Kale too, was a simple Google search one day.
Yep. First time it didn't. And it's been fun because our gym supports CatchLife, and essentially
awesome.
I think we've done 3 events so far. Me and my wife last year helped. I forget how much we raised. I think we ended up raising like $1,000. It was fun because I got to come in and talk. I think that's the key thing with it. That Leah and Colin like to partner with at Omni, is because they're very big on of course inclusivity, and they work with a lot of people that have disabilities, right? And they were like, they want to be a part of organizations where you actually see the impact of where the money goes, right? Well, literally staying in the gym, working out every day, help coaching as well. I coach USA weightlifting too. So it's just kind of cool to see full circle. But yeah, so normally I'm very active with like getting people to sign up, and also outlining like, yes, the money actually goes towards the veterans. I'm an example of that, right? So you do want to support us. And it's been cool because we've been able to, get grants for other veterans within the gym. And even I remember we had an event, we had a couple veterans come in that, like, oh, I can't afford CrossFit anymore. I was like, hey, here's CatchLife, right? So it's just cool to actually see where the money goes to. But yeah, so that's how our roundabout conversation. I know I can get sidetracked.
No, that's tremendous, and thank you so much for doing that and spreading the word of CatchLife and being a tremendous ambassador like that for the organization. We're so very grateful for that. I do have one last question for you today, Alex. What does it mean to you to be a CatchLife Fund Veteran Athlete?
Ooh, that's a great question. I know I keep saying that. That's always a great question, but no, these are good questions. So that. Let me ponder for 1 second. So for me, what it means, I think it just goes back to that military piece of it, right? Yeah. We are literally representative of our veteran community, right? So I don't want to be a dingus and about it. And then 2, on top of that, I'm representing CatchLife, right? You all had me on this lovely podcast, and essentially, it's one of those where I want to ensure that I'm honoring CatchLife, right, and the story behind it. So essentially what it means to me is it allows me, of course, to be able to, as I used to call it, walk the demons, right? Because we deal with that inner struggle with the PTSD and everything else, and without CatchLife, I necessarily wouldn't be able to do that every day, right? And probably have a harder struggle with it. But knowing that, it's a tremendous honor just to even be funded. And even to be funded, I think it's kind of the key thing there. Even if, listeners are like, oh, well, I'm funded, I'm kind of keep to myself. It's like, well, we are representing that, right? We're representing the veteran community and CatchLife. So it's really cool honor. It's also fun to be able to talk. I know the listeners will hopefully resonate with this lovely message as well. It does truly mean a lot for me to be able to represent. That's why I'm pushing for, hopefully maybe either the Masters for CrossFit or, the tactical games, because I can wear all my like CatchLife stuff, talk to people. I think it's just being, I got the nickname Soapbox, stand on my soapbox and essentially be like, hey, look, CatchLife is doing a great thing. Because I also, and that's why I wake up every day, really to push, because it's like, I am a representative of CatchLife, and I want it to be perceived as, with one that is honorable, right? That honor that we hold, and Does that answer your question? I know I
Heck
went
yeah,
on.
that answers it great. Yeah, Alex, thank you so much for your service to our great country, and thank you
Yeah.
for the continued tremendous work you continue to do in your life and in your community. We're very
Yeah.
grateful for you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. Absolutely. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Coach's Corner. We're always so grateful to have the opportunity to connect with our members and heal through the stories of our veterans. A special thank you to our guest today, Alex, for sharing your story and your light with us all today. It was absolutely fantastic. Don't forget to join us every Wednesday live at 1 p.m. Eastern on YouTube for a chance to win Cal Swag and to chat with your brothers and sisters. If you like today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and leave us a review on your favorite streaming service. Until next week, keep it real and stay Cal strong.